It's hot, it's cold, the weather feels different. I look at the television set, I read the newspapers, I go online, I see lots of stuff about climate change. Episode 20 and 21, the next one, is a two-part conversation with two different people working on the issue of climate change in our church. Today, we're going to talk with Phoebe Morad of Lutherans Restoring Creation. This member of House of Prayer Lutheran Church in Hingham, Massachusetts, has been passionate about on-the-ground grassroots work in this area. We sit down, we talk. It's a Skype conversation, so the audio quality is a little different than what you're used to. And that's part one. And then next week in part two, you're going to want to join me for episode 21, where I sit down and talk with Jim Antal, who's the executive minister of the Massachusetts United Church of Christ. He's got a new book out on climate change, and he's been very involved in this particular topic for a number of years. But first, let's do this episode with Phoebe Morad.
And you had asked kind of how I got into this. And that kind of backstory is, I think, most interesting for pastors to know, because I was just talking to a group of first call pastors about how never to profile people in your community, because you never know what they'll say yes to. Because when Pastor Susan Henry first got started, this was about a decade ago. Well, no, it was 2010 that she had asked me, I heard that you were into green stuff and there's this group of Lutherans getting together at some camp in Chicago. Would you want to go? And I think most pastors would think not to ask a mother of a 2-year-old, would you like to go, to Chicago for a week? But I was so ready. She probably could have said, do you want to go collect trash in Chicago? And I might have said yes. But
is that just because you had a 2-year-old and you were looking for an opportunity?
I had a 2-year-old and she was hitting the terrible twos. And I was like, yeah, I'll go. Where do you want me to go? Yeah, I'll go. But what was wonderful about this is that she had heard that I was in the person at church interested in recycling. That's kind of all she knew at that point. What she didn't know, and that Paul Sinnott did know, is that I did a master's thesis using House of Prayer, Lutheran Church, as a case study with our relationship. So I was doing my master's in public administration, and I wanted to do it on social capital. And I took our church's relationship with styrofoam cups as a case study. I thought it always baffled me that it seemed like our church had such a hard time getting rid of styrofoam cups when there were some people in the church that really had an emotional connection to wanting to get rid of these things that they thought were causing them health problems. So I had done that a couple years earlier and just thought it was very interesting to see the connection between people's faith and the bureaucratic processes that then people get into when they're running a church. So that was interesting anyways. Then when I was able to go to this group of Lutherans meeting at a camp in Chicago.
And what was this group of Lutherans meeting?
This group of Lutherans was called Lutherans Restoring Creation, which I didn't know until I arrived. And I was blown away with how it was essentially came up organically from a few, a great seminary professor, a deacon, some people that were already environmentalists and thought, wait a minute, why isn't this connected to our theology? And one seminary professor in particular, David Rhodes at the seminary in Chicago, had written these incredible curriculums about how to connect Lutheran theology with eco-theology. And he had a few students that just thought, you've done this great curriculum. We don't want to wait for it to trickle through the seminary system and get these pastors out. Let's get it out to congregations. Right. So a few pesky students also got him to get this information out. And that's what accumulated in this experience of about 30 of us together at this camp out in, just outside of Chicago. I think it was from at least a dozen different synods across the country. And we got together and said, okay, this is a great curriculum. Let's get it to churches. Since then, they started to do a few more of these workshops. Then I started to really get into it and wanted to help train at these workshops as well. We did a couple in the DC area. Then there were another one in Chicago. We just kind of kept expanding, and then
and what were these workshops? I mean, you said it started with seminary. Was it theology? What was kind of the center of the focus?
Sure. Essentially, the cornerstone of what David Rhodes was great at doing was that he saw that this isn't something that needs to be cast off to the side as a green thing to do in the corner. The eco-theology part of this is integral into every single part of our worship, of our Christian education, of our buildings and grounds, obviously, but it can be integrated into the whole ethos of the church. So the way his curriculum works is to look at any existing committees that hopefully one church would have, and be able to come to that committee saying, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? In very practical ways.
Like, give me an example.
So for worship and music, there are tons of examples and tools that we hand over to the worship and music committee saying, you might do something special for Earth Day, but did you know you can also think about this? Think about do you guys use all those little plastic cups? And do you think about how that, where that ends up and what kind of trace that might leave, as far as us being stewards of God's creation? So trying to give people a lot of solutions right off the bat, rather than the kind of doom and gloom that when you look at secular information, that's kind of overwhelming. So what I appreciated too about his, because he's a seminary professor and wicked smart, he gave this integrity to something that I had always felt a connection to. So personally, I always thought, us treating the environment was something that was a moral responsibility that was part of our Christian vocation anyways. But in doing my master's research, I realized, not everyone thinks that way. And a lot of people don't necessarily even feel any spiritual connection when outside. I happen to have the benefit of going camping a lot as a kid. And I had these experiences that gave me that connection that unless it was written down in black and white for some people, they couldn't get the connection. So if you have a bunch of environmentalist Christians in a room and people that don't see any reason why this usual political issue should come up, we're always going to be talking past each other unless we get into the theological connections of why is this part of our vocation as a Christian.
Now, you just said something that kind of surprised me because, when you said that some people, they don't make a spiritual connection with nature. You didn't say it that way, but that's, I think, what you're saying, which kind of surprised me because, and maybe this is generational, but my experience is that younger people tend to connect with nature, and nature is their entree into the divine. And maybe it's older folks, nature is something that we use for us, such as to build a sanctuary, and then it's inside that church that I have the spiritual connection. You're nodding your head. Is that your experience as well?
Yes, I certainly find that. And one of the key, where I thought that this was such a need to have Lutherans Restoring Creation as an organization, that this wasn't just a good curriculum to help churches, that this is an idea that will help a lot of my friends who might believe in a God certainly don't feel any connection when they walk into a church like they do when they're outside.
Yeah.
And when I went to this first session out in this camp just outside of Chicago and realized they were giving legitimacy, here was a seminary professor saying, it's okay, it's not pagan, it's okay to be able to find the sacred in what God created for us outside.
Yeah.
And then give us tools as to how to bring that outside into our worship and how to bring our worship outside into the world.
Yeah.
So because before I really was as I was just starting my family, I was personally at a point where I was thinking, do I dive into my church more? I mean, I was going because my Grammy and my mom were there. Should I keep going just to hang out with them every morning? When I have to say going for a walk, sometimes I would get a better spiritual connection or just feel more relaxed. And it wasn't until I went to this particular session that I realized I can have both, and I can help bring this into the church that I feel is missing. And then I do feel like our generation, the younger generations, definitely don't see a connection or don't see that enough in our churches, unfortunately.
So would you say that this whole experience is for you personally kind of helped wed those two things together, your church life and your nature life, for lack of a better language?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And my professional life.
Okay.
Really, too, because I had worked in an environmental organization that was scientifically based and never really felt like I could wear my religion on my sleeve, because that was, it's a lot of people think you have to check your head at the door when you walk into a church. And I was able to finally, when I first went to a reunion with people that I used to work with at Earthwatch Institute, bunch of scientists, and I said, I'm working with Lutherans Restoring Creation, and the whole circle of people stepped back. I did it because I used the word creation, and in a scientific community,
yes, they associate that with creationism.
Yeah. So I explained to them that creation is the word you have to use for environment in the church setting so that people get it and it's not politicized. But I've really appreciated being able to go to environmental conferences and be able to show off the fact that people with a religious background not only can get into this, but can use that as part of their, especially part of their foundation to keep going with this work. And what I love about the Lutheran theology that's taught me, because I certainly haven't gone to seminary, but being able to hear more and more about the saint and sinner mentality, that's helped me compensate the whole, the guilt that I have, and be able to wrap my arms around it and understand the fact that I am always going to be complicit, but what to do with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so Lutherans Restoring Creation is what is it? Is it kind of a network of people that are doing this work around the country?
Yes. So there's always been a lot of work with caring for creation, but in little teeny silos or in one congregation here and there. The mission of Lutherans Restoring Creation was to network those people so we can leverage our assets, know what each other is doing, not recreate any wheels unless you want to. Some people like to do that. But also to show the ELCA, the larger church, that, hey, this is important to us, and this should be part of the larger nationwide work. So since 2010, it's evolved from us doing a couple workshops and having a great program that we work with Energy Star, just to help create the tools and make sure there's a celebration of when churches do energy savings and do worship settings that are more naturally setted. And so to be able to highlight all of those things and network each other is more of our mission now. And we are a nonprofit organization over the past year, officially. And we decided as a steering committee, we got together and realized there's still enough work to do. And it shouldn't be under the umbrella of the ELCA. They do enough work, and they definitely, and ELCA advocacy are our connection in DC, so that we can keep our ear to the ground as to what things are going on down there that we should be advocates for or learn more about or educate our members. But while we work hand in hand with the ELCA offices, we like to be separate so that we can come up with, okay, what do we want to do now? And then kind of usher that into the system rather than, necessarily waiting for the entire church to agree on something. And then
Right. Yeah. No, that would take forever and would be very frustrating. Believe me, I work in that tribe. So one of the things that I know that 2 years ago at the churchwide assembly, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Lutherans Restoring Creation helped pass a resolution that had to do with investments, with financial investments of the ELCA as a whole, or the churchwide offices really more than anything, and Portico, which is our pension, if you will, benefits plan. Talk about that. What was that, and what has that resulted in?
Sure. Well, I'd like to say that it's resulted in more thus far, but it keeps going. In 2016, we realized, whoa, the whole churchwide's coming together, And there are a lot of either singular churches or synods that had put together resolutions that they wanted to either divest, there's a spectrum, either totally divest from fossil fuels if at all possible, or at least focus on investing in more renewable sources. But just being more aware of where they put their either endowment money, realizing once we had this coalition of people that really came to us, to Lutherans Restoring Creation, saying, we want to get this going. How do we make sure that other synods across the country send a memorial in so that this comes to the floor? Because it had been tried again 3 years before, but there was a lot going on that year. So it never made it to the floor. So 2016, we were ready. And what was really important about this year is not only did we send out information to all the voting members way before so that they knew the breadth and width of this conversation, that it wasn't just, let's get all of our money out of oil. There was a lot more to it than that. And so we tried to inform the members well before they got there, but also being at the churchwide assembly and having that cohort of people that were really interested in this divestment/investment movement. They were able to talk to people like Chris Berger and figure out, how do we write this? Because we don't want to this doesn't want to just be an angry, shout out to oil companies. This is, how do we work with Portico to make sure that we're investing in the companies that we want to put more money in, and giving people more of a choice. So having a coalition there meant that we could work with Portico and with other entities to make sure we could write something that everybody, again, it was compromises,
right,
but it was still a step forward. And thus far, we still have that divestment/investment group meeting together, talking back and forth with Portico. And now our next step is to ensure that we're tracking, if we're talking about our churches wanting to do this and wanting to be more energy efficient, we're trying to work more with Energy Star to look at those numbers, because we do have churches that are plugging in all their numbers. It would be nice to go to Portico and say, yes, we want you to invest less in these energies, and this is what we're doing on the church side to show that this is what matters to us.
I see.
So that's our next step.
Got it. And then on a more local level, I don't know the details, but I believe your congregation that you're a member of, House of Prayer, recently went through or is going through a building renovation project. It's not a new construction. And so I'm sure that's been a really interesting experience for you, engaging in those conversations on both an energy savings, dealing with those people who are focused exclusively on dollars, and also just, how much can a congregation spend to update its facility. What's that been like?
So also to add to the mix, my husband is the facilities volunteer.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So that helps a little bit, but not much, because although he agrees with me, when it comes down to it, things like I've been wanting to put solar panels on we're in a perfect place for solar panels, but when it comes down to it, we need a new roof first. Right. So, and before we get a new roof, we really have to fix the envelope of our building or it's going to fall in. So those very pragmatic details, I realize, it was an EPA Energy Star rep mentioned, you don't want to put solar panels on top of a Hummer.
Right.
And that's
it's a good analogy.
It's a really good, and I keep thinking of that, thinking, yeah, I want the bling, I want everybody to see we care about this, but we're doing more stuff now that matter, like putting in not very sexy things, but things that work more, are putting in programmable thermostats. We went totally organic with our lawn care. Now we're trying to do the next step, actually, I just found out there's a grant to remove our irrigation system if we want to put in a more perennial garden or xeriscape. So things like that. And again, I'm on the end of going to facilities and stewardship saying, okay, here are ways that we can get grant money and save money to do these things, rather than coming to them saying, can we spend all this money on a solar panel that will fall through our roof?
Right.
Yeah. So
that's great that you are having that experience as a member of a congregation, so that as you are talking with other people, they're going to be saying, we want to put solar panels on our roof, and you can say, I do too, but I would suggest you first look like, do do you need a new roof? Because that's one of the things I've heard is like, you got to have a new roof because not so much even falling through, it's just how they attach the solar panels. I mean, there's a lot of engineering involved in that kind of stuff. Because we've looked at this for the Synod House too, and we did put a new roof on 2 years ago, which was needed after about 20 plus years. So we could now look at that as an option, but we need to do it in stages. And also there was a whole level of insulation, just the insulation that we added alone, that has had as much of an impact as anything. So
yeah, and it's all those things too that you don't see and you don't get to show off. But I did that. I want, and that's part of the whole celebrating each other's work that I do try to lift up for other congregations. And I have to remember, I'm not a techie person, so I'm just not a numbers person. I'm more into the touchy-feely stuff. So I depend heavily on people like Interfaith Power and Light, and any kind of organization that can put numbers to the savings, because those are people that can help translate to the other side of your mind, as far as this relates to, you can give this many more meals every year because you're saving this much money. And so I understand that it's really important to measure and monitor what all those things can do, because in the long run, that's one of our assets. It is wonderful that we're saving energy just for the planet's sake, but that also in our economy can translate into helping more people.
Yeah.
So,
well, just last Sunday, I was at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Woburn, Mass, and they just installed whole new solar panels. They actually were able to get them installed the Saturday, the day before. I mean, they'd been working on it for a long time. It's like they were so glad I was coming because I was the deadline. The pastor was saying, the bishop is coming, so you've got to have this done. Now they weren't hooked up. But one of the things that is a little bit of a disappointment for them is that because of the nature of their roof and the way in which these solar panels needed to be designed to maximize solar usage, you can't see them.
Oh.
I mean, you'd need a drone or a helicopter. You can't see them from the highway. You can't see them from the parking lot. I mean, if you go up in one corner of the parking lot, you kind of walk up the hill just about 15 feet, you can kind of get a glimpse of them. But, it's like, well, why are we doing this? Are we doing it to show off? Well, yes, but, and they have a 1960s facility that is just dreadful in terms of, heat and insulation and stuff like that. So they're doing a number of different things, including windows and all of that. So it's just a really, really interesting process that congregations
and that kind of idea too, that things are hidden, just brings up the theological mentality of, it's not all about your works, is it?
Yeah, that's true.
So
if people are... go ahead. You were going to say something.
I just wanted to mention, I love doing this in my church for some of those reasons, but the biggest reason I love to integrate this into my personal church life is because I go to a great politically diverse church. And I get to sit next to people who I know darn well did not vote for the person I wanted to. And when I sit with them and I'm able to worship and sing with them and make beautiful music together, and then we've had Bible study type courses on looking at our vocation as caregivers for the planet, we're able to talk about that stuff in that setting and agree to disagree or agree on things we never thought we would. But it helps because I'm a news junkie and you hear things on these either extremes all the time, and to be able to sit in church with people I know that I on a different level with, but can come together on a heart level, that means all the difference and that gives me a great deal of hope. That is what I'm trying to share too. We're working with a lot of people down in the Southeastern Synod right now, and that's something that I hear from them coming up a lot. That it's really important for them to use this as a form of hope and healing in their church. But usually it's water that seems to be the nice common denominator that people can come to. Climate change and energy savings is not, the word energy in other parts of the country is kind of taboo, but when you get into water, that kind of thing. So trying to find how this can build common ground for people, I think, is what has given me the most hope in this work.
Oh, that's nice. That's really, that's wonderful. Wonderful opportunity. So if somebody's listening to this and they want to learn more about Lutherans Restoring Creation, where do they go? How do they get in touch with you?
Sure. We have a website that has way too much information. It's lutheransrestoringcreation.org. And right now we're trying to organize that a little better to be more of a curated library. So if you want information, I really just want you to call me. Okay. And I can walk you through our website or find someone who's done something that you're looking to do. Can I give my phone number?
If you want.
Okay. It's 617-599-2722. And we're also we're trying to create a map that shows more of a listed network of who we have doing what throughout the country. That's what's going to take a little while. So for now, give me a call because there are people doing this work all over the place. So you don't have to recreate wheels, or if you need somebody to talk to, we have a monthly call where it's usually what we call green sheep getting on the line with each other because we usually feel like the outcast. So it's nice to just be on the phone with each other once a month to say, we're trying to do this, but this didn't work. Do you have any ideas? So that's more of a brainstorming session. So get on our, when you're on the LRC site, you can click a join button and just put in your information so you get that ongoing e-blast that I send every.
All right, great. Lutheransrestoringcreation.org.
Yep.
Well, great. Well, good. Well, thanks for having this conversation with me.
Thank you.